All right, we'll get started in a few seconds here. Alrighty. So my name is Erik Voorhees. When we did a talk last year at PorcFest about Bitcoin, and last year it was a little bit more of an introduction to Bitcoin, what it was, how it worked. A lot of people still didn't really understand Bitcoin back then. But I think, as you'll notice just by walking around the campground, it's starting to become somewhat ubiquitous, at least within the Liberty movement, which is very exciting to us. So this year we wanted to focus a little bit more and actually talk about things that were a little bit more subversive. So we decided this year that we would do a talk on how Bitcoin can be used to subvert one's government. And this is a little exciting for us because we usually are going around to industry conferences in which we have to sort of downplay the subversive nature of Bitcoin. And we have to talk about, how it reduces fees and how you can move money around much more nicely than PayPal, and how if you want to comply with the regulations, you can do so, and you can be a good little citizen with Bitcoin. But here at PorcFest, we thought it'd be fun to explore the other side of things. So I'll add a little disclaimer here that we just want to review some of this stuff sort of from an academic perspective, from our intellectual curiosity. We certainly do not advocate anyone breaking any rules of any totalitarian regime that they might be living under, whether you're in Iran or China or America. So take all the things that we say with a grain of salt, and obviously we want lots of questions from you guys. And if anything doesn't get answered during this talk, we'll be happy to speak with you after the discussion. We have two tables that are up in Agora Alley, Coinapult and Satoshi Dice. You'll see those. So feel free to stop by whenever and just chat with us about anything. So I will introduce the panelists. Starting from the end, we have Gabriel Sukenik and also Ira Miller. Gabe and Ira are colleagues of mine. We work for a company called Coinapult. We are based down in Panama City, and we've been involved in Bitcoin for a couple years now, several different projects. This is Vitalik Buterin. He writes for the Bitcoin magazine, almost all the articles. I don't know if, has anyone... When the Bitcoin magazine came out, I thought it was a little gimmicky at first, then I started reading it, and it's actually fantastic commentary, very well written, and we have this guy to thank for it. So I recommend all of you guys check out the website and also the print magazine as well. You can find
our magazines are on sale here at various different shops, or from me.
You can find them in lots of Barnes and Nobles around the U.S. And then this is Josh Harvey. Many of you know him. He lives here in Manchester. And he runs a Bitcoin company called Lamasu, and they have built the Bitcoin ATM, which some of you may have seen here. Very cool piece of technology.
At Revolution Coffee. At Revolution Coffee, come by and stop by.
So I think yesterday, during that little competition up here, where you had a lot of people pitching business ideas, some of you may have learned how much Bitcoin was being discussed. And this is because Bitcoin and agorism go together very, very nicely. And in fact, Bitcoin allows a scale of agorism that has never been accomplished before. So the broad theme of a lot of what we'll talk about falls under the category of agorism. And I think there are a few primary topics that we'll try to cover up here. We'll try to cover topics of privacy. We'll cover topics of agorism and business development and entrepreneurialism. We'll cover topics of free speech and also wealth movement and preservation. These are all things that Bitcoin is tremendously helpful for. So we'll go into the ways that Bitcoin assists private individuals in furthering their own goals, often those goals being at the direct expense of their own government. So first, we'll go to Ira over here. Ira's going to give us some thoughts on Bitcoin and privacy and how that might relate to the government's wishes in this day and age.
So, who here has heard of Prism? Yeah, pretty savvy crowd then. Until very recently, most people in this wonderful United States of America did not believe that their government was spying on them. In the Bitcoin and crypto anarchy circles, it was a pretty common theme to talk about NSA reading all your emails, listening to all your phone calls, and watching all your financial transactions. This is, after all, how most taxes are actually collected in the end. You can negotiate your salary with your employer, you can get paid, but the mechanism by which you get paid is how usually the government registers your income. And if they can't track your income, they have a much harder time actually knowing how much it is that you supposedly owe them. This is how Bitcoin can help everyday people hide their income from the government. Sorry, is that better? So this all stretches out of a technology called cryptography. With cryptography, you can send messages to each other privately with no one able to intercept them. Be that a company you don't trust, like your ISP, anyone else sitting on your wireless router, the NSA listening in at all their big data centers around the country. Bitcoin is really the outgrowth of cryptography and this private messaging into money. So now you can not only communicate with each other freely around the world, but also send money to each other freely around the world. I think that pretty much sums up privacy for it.
Yeah, and I'll add on this topic of privacy. Sort of, before Bitcoin, I think a lot of people were realizing that the world was moving away from cash, and I think a lot of people hadn't really understood the ramifications of that. As you move away from cash into your debit cards and your credit cards, you essentially are giving up a certain degree of your privacy without even really knowing it. And no one really likes cash. It's dirty, and you never have the right change, and it's annoying to go to the ATM all the time. So good riddance if we can get rid of it. But it's very tragic if by getting rid of it we also lose our privacy. So now that we have Bitcoin, we have all the benefits of cash's privacy, and we can still engage in the global economy. We can still buy things from other countries in any size or form, and we don't have to worry about that going into some huge database on Visa's servers to be pruned by the NSA at whatever whim they wish. So,
or the IRS, more likely. I mean, you mentioned,
any agency.
Last night, all the business ideas, the agorist business pitches that we were listening to. A lot of the agorist businesses were talking about doing business online, about how they could accept payments, thanks to our wonderful Simon, goading them to talk more about their business model. You cannot really accept checks, you cannot really accept credit cards or bank transfers for any agorist business. They will come and find you and make you explain all those transactions. The only real ways that you can fund an agorist business are cash and Bitcoin. And cash is obviously very local. Bitcoin is the only way to do it over a distance.
Right. Yeah. Before Bitcoin, if you wanted to have an agorist business at distance, people on a campground that want to run an agorist hair salon can accept gold and silver coins, and that works. But how do you scale that into an actual enterprise level agorist business? Anyone can ship gold and silver from a country to you, but that gets very difficult and becomes cost prohibitive very quickly. So this idea of being able to now have an agorist business scale is, I think, quite remarkable. And perhaps that's a good segue into a certain agorist business that many of you have heard about called the Silk Road. Does anyone here not know what the Silk Road is? Okay. The Silk Road is one of the one of the phenomena of Bitcoin that caused a lot of press attention early on. And basically, it is a online website where people can buy illegal drugs of any kind, and you pay with Bitcoin exclusively, and the drugs are shipped to you to your mailbox at your house or wherever. And obviously, this is quite revolutionary to just be able to hop online, buy some heroin, and then have it arrive on your doorstep. And it really was like a first use case for Bitcoin before anyone had really heard about it. And right after this story broke, there were U.S. senators basically obviously denouncing it and saying that they were going to go shut this thing down. 2 years later, it's 10 times the size of what it was before. And probably Silk Road is the largest scale agorist business in the world right now. And it's growing. It's going all over the U.S. So that's proven that basically a business can operate on top of cryptography and on top of Bitcoin completely outside the reach of the government. And any average person can log on and order goods from this site. So that's been pretty exciting to see. On the topic of agorism, there's also increasingly a number of people around the world who work for themselves. And I'll let Vitalik talk about this, but Bitcoin now allows freelance people to really start operating wherever they wish. Yes. So Vitalik, tell people basically what you're doing and how you're working currently with Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I've been writing for Bitcoin Magazine for about the past 2 years now, and basically one of the best things about my job is that I can do it from wherever in the world that I want, and everyone else in the magazine is also working from basically various different locations around the world. We have myself in Canada, we have our PR person in the US, we have the person putting everything together in Spain right now, and some people in South America, basically everywhere around the world. You know, people ask where are our offices located? I tell them Bitcoin Magazine is located in the cloud. Now, this is really revolutionary because we really haven't had businesses that are sort of based internationally to this scale before. Now, multinational corporations have been able to do these kinds of things for about 40 years, and we've already seen the results of that. You know, we see scandals in the media every other month about how Starbucks manages to get away with paying 1.3% tax or whatever, and same with... Good for them, right? Well, same with Google or Amazon. But the thing is that up until now, these sorts of mechanisms, it's called jurisdictional arbitrage, sort of, where everyone can work in jurisdictions that are favorable to them, and it doesn't really matter where you are because the internet makes the transmission of data and money, and with Bitcoin money, essentially painless and instant. The thing is that before now, we've basically had this inequality where large corporations could afford these mechanisms, whereas the little guys basically stuck paying the bill. Now, on the other hand, you know, things like the internet, things like Bitcoin, things like Tor, they are seriously lowering the barrier to entry. Anyone can basically start a business at a startup cost of, well, pretty much $0 in 20 minutes. That's like really all it takes to start selling things. And the beautiful part is that with Bitcoin, you know, you're able to take advantage of these exact same mechanisms pretty much just as well as anyone else. And the other advantage is also the practical surveillance aspect. So you can essentially get around a whole bunch of legal registration requirements. Like, for example, if I wanted to move to the U.S. and work here, like the process for some people takes many months, for some people takes years, for some people it's outright impossible. If I wanted to, theoretically, I could just come in here as a tourist and sort of just sit around and just quietly keep working away with my laptop, and no one would know the difference. No, it's practical applied crypto anarchy, essentially.
Yeah, imagine what this does for the free movement of labor, where before you would not only have to deal with the getting your body physically across the border, but once you arrive in a country, getting a job, you're going to have to plug into some sort of payment system that knows your identity. So whether you're signing up for a PayPal account in some country or you're trying to get a bank account so that you can get paid in your new location, that becomes a gateway and a checkpoint where they find out that you're not supposed to be in the country, and it becomes a huge barrier. Now that barrier is totally gone because no longer do you need to plug into any of those systems that require your identity. You can get paid now without revealing your identity from anywhere that you choose.
Even better, trying to get a tourist visa that's not really available to a lot of people, but you can just stay in your country as long as you've got internet access. You don't have to go to the US to work and deal with all the paperwork and difficulties.
Yeah, but I don't know, being at PorcFest remotely just doesn't sound as fun.
Have any of you heard of the concept of System D? Do you know what this term refers to? Gabe, why don't you let the audience know about what System D is?
Sure. System D is kind of just System D is basically the pretty name that economists have given the black market. So they were basically trying to research how much economic activity is really going on globally that exists in the gray markets, the unregulated markets, the cash markets, just to try to assess the size. And it's already been a few years ago where the number they pegged on it was something like $10 trillion globally annually are going through System D. And it's happening from, people selling apples on the side of the road to large corporations knowing that later down the food chain there's going to be somebody selling their product in an unregulated market. So the size of this potential market is interesting for a few reasons. It's totally global. So the average citizen in Kenya has just as much access to this new transfer mechanism as an American citizen with a PayPal account, U.S. bank account, debit card, credit card. And it's real. I think that is really going to be Bitcoin's greatest pickup. Is ultimately all these people now have cash. Sorry about that. All these people now have access to basically digital cash. And I just got back from a trip in South Africa. I just think this is an interesting anecdote. And a lot of the banks out there are trying to figure out how to get customers using mobile banking. Because they all have cell phones, but they don't have access to the Bank of America around the corner. And none of them thought that privacy was a concern. They just didn't bring it up because it's mostly just banks and regulators sitting in this room trying to figure it out. But anybody now with Bitcoin, you basically completely skip that whole process. Everybody there has a cell phone, and the privacy aspect in terms of the reason they stay on cash is secure. The unregulated market, System D, I think is going to be a huge benefactor to Bitcoin.
Yes, System D, I guess another way to think about it is it's really just another term for the agora, or the total culmination of all agorist businesses around the world, you could call System D. And governments have always been bothered by the fact that this exists and that they can't collect tax revenue from all these little gray market transactions, little rural farmers or people that just don't report things in the way that they're supposed to. But they tolerate the system and they don't try to seriously infringe on it because it's always limited typically to a local scale because much of it requires that it's using cash. So what happens when that huge gray market economy around the world, the agora, is no longer bound by cash? What if the payment system that they're using provides the anonymity of cash, but now they can have customers not just down the street from them, but on the other side of the world entirely? So how big do you think that the System D, this agora, is going to get when it's no longer confined to people's immediate vicinity? This is going to be something that will be very exciting to watch over the coming years as Bitcoin develops. And at some point, I would imagine that the governments are going to not be so happy about System D anymore because it's going to start swallowing up more and more and more of the actual economy.
If I can add something quickly to that. In Panama, where we just moved our business, they say something, it was like 50-some% of the economy is the informal economy.
Yeah, the informal economy.
Basically, 50% of the Panamanian economy is actually a System D economy. And the interesting thing about this demographically is that these are the poorest people. As Gabe mentioned, these are people selling, apples on the side of the road, or churros on the beach, or knockoff sunglasses and clothes. These are the people that need to keep their money the most. And in Panama, they actually talk about this as if it's a good thing, because they want to reduce barriers for small businesses. They want somebody to take their apples from their orchard and go out on the street and sell them. And in the long run, System D can help these people the most. It has the most to offer to the poorest people in the world. And if we can frame this argument well in the Bitcoin world, I think that we can both subvert the government, take more of the economic activity and bring it into the gray and black markets, and also paint a moral story that we are improving the lot of the people in the world that need it the most.
Yeah, and I think when people say subverting governments, it sounds very anarchic and scary and bomb throwing and all that stuff. But let's remember that many governments around the world are extremely tyrannical and oppressive. And even if you love the United States government because it's so free and wonderful, you should still be able to get behind the idea of a private payment system, because the most oppressed people around the world will use it to subvert their government, right? So even if you're the most diehard, flag-waving American, wouldn't you be in favor of a system that would allow individuals to subvert the Chinese government, or subvert the Iranian government, or the North Korean government?
Yeah. And just as an example of this, there's a software called Tor, the Onion Router. It's sort of a way to anonymize your internet connection. And actually, about 90% of Tor's funding actually comes from the United States military. Tor is part of the United States military strategy against dictatorial regimes. That's just a clever way that we can use governments against each other.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch how governments play off each other when it comes to an issue like Bitcoin. Will the Chinese government be the first ones to seriously outlaw Bitcoin, or will it be the U.S.? And when one of them outlaws it, will the other government take the other position? I guess it'll be a race to see which one is the most tyrannical of all, and the winner might be this government, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt for now. So let's switch topics a little bit to the topic of wealth movement and preservation. Everyone has some wealth, whether it's small or large, and we don't want it to be seized or taken or wrested from us unfairly. So many of the things that you can do with Bitcoin go in direct violation of governmental rules, but they help you maintain your wealth and to keep it. The obvious matter is, one of taxation. If you wish to receive income privately and not report it, not that I recommend you doing that, but if you wish to do that, Bitcoin now gives you a way to do this on a larger scale, and you can actually make a very large business, whether it's Silk Road or something else, and actually keep the money that you earn. And some people like that just because they're greedy and they want more money, and some people like that because they have a moral stance that they do not want to be funding tyranny around the world. They do not want to be paying taxation toward a government that's going to buy bombs and kill children in Afghanistan, for example. So this allows people with those sorts of moral arguments to actually take the power for themselves and make these kinds of decisions. Also, in the U.S., as much as many of us hate the banking system and feel that the government is oppressive, there are countries where you actually cannot move your money out of the country if you wish to. So countries like Argentina right now, or China, or Iran, these are places where people who live there really cannot move their wealth when they wish to.
Even in the U.S., you can move it, right? But we're going to take 30% off the top when you do it, and you got to fill out the right form first, and maybe we'll say no.
Right now in Argentina, there's a law that if anything that you buy from abroad has a 50% tax on it. So if you try to buy something on Amazon, it's going to cost you 50% more just because of the tax. And the reason is the government there is inflating the currency like crazy and is being debased. And so they do not want people to purchase products abroad in order to retain their wealth by buying gold or property or even cars somewhere else, anything that would retain value better than the the Argentinian peso.
Yeah, and in Argentina, it's not even just purchases. If you're trying to wire money to a business in Argentina, the government has a capital control law in place that basically says, okay, well, we're just going to take 30% of this, we're going to sit on it, investigate, and then we'll decide if you deserve, the last 30%.
I think it's up to 60 now because of the exchange rate float.
So 60%. I apologize. Not up to date in Argentina, but yeah, these capital controls, it's not even like they're irrelevant. They're not even just being ignored. So Bitcoin, you just zip it in Argentina, and there's your extra 30 or 60% float. So that's nice.
Yeah, Argentina is a very good example right now because of their inflation. I don't know how many normal Americans are aware of what's going on, but they tend to destroy their currency roughly every 8 or 10 years. And the people there are very familiar with this process, but they haven't really had many solutions. They can acquire metals to some degree, but those are physical. It's hard to move those across borders. It's hard to keep them from being noticed. And now, this time they're destroying their currency. There's actually a lifeboat waiting for these people, and it's called Bitcoin. And people down there can just acquire coins, to some degree, and then hold them and no longer worry about the money printing. It basically lets these people sidestep the terrible monetary policies of their own government. So let's see, what else? Oh, hold on. Someone brought up earlier when we were talking the example of the death tax. A lot of people have a serious problem with the idea that you pay your taxes all your life, and then you work to build up an inheritance for your children to help them go to school or to build a home and family for themselves. And then the government takes the tax again once you die. Wouldn't it be great if you could just take the money that you were going to donate to someone, put it into a hidden form that could not be confiscated and would be invisible to the authorities, and then there's no longer a death tax. Essentially, the whole thing becomes irrelevant. And I suppose it's just a matter of time until people start realizing that these tools exist. And it's moving obviously very quickly. A year ago, half the people at PorcFest were accepting Bitcoin and understood it. Now almost everyone does. Let's move now into the matter of free speech. You've all been watching this crazy stuff happening with Edward Snowden in Hong Kong, right? He's the whistleblower who basically revealed all this crazy NSA bullshit. And if you want to help him out, you can't send him PayPal, right? PayPal can freeze the funds. He can't pull that out of a bank or anything. But you can send him Bitcoin. And not only does he not need to know who you are, so if he got captured, he wouldn't reveal you because he doesn't even know who you are if you sent him money. But anyone in the world can now send him funds via Bitcoin to help support that kind of thing. So what kind of incentive do you think that creates when a whistleblower now knows that there is a whole world of people who will stand up and donate to them because the donators now do not need to fear prosecution themselves? So Bitcoin is not just a matter of money and business, but actually of free speech itself. Gabe, you want to talk about the WikiLeaks and?
I don't know if I have too many unique thoughts on this, but WikiLeaks is, of course, another great example. They're constantly disclosing documents that the U.S. government doesn't want disclosed. And anybody know how much Bitcoin money WikiLeaks has raised? I bet
they
it's
have
significant.
raised over $80,000, and that's not too recent a statistic.
For them, that's a monster number. For a lot of nonprofits, that's a monster number. That financial ability for some, WikiLeaks literally had their accounts closed. Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal were all told you can't pay them. And
their bank accounts were also frozen, so all the money they'd received up till then was confiscated.
Right. Yeah, as long as that's possible, holding U.S. dollars is a liability. Holding Bitcoin is never going to be a liability for somebody just arbitrarily taking your wallet. So. Right.
Have any of you flown on an airplane and you arrive into a new country or into the U.S. and it asks you if you're carrying more than $10,000? Have you guys seen that? Well, no one ever has to carry $10,000 or ever report it ever again. So if you ever find yourself in that situation where you're moving somewhere, whether it's into the U.S. or out of the U.S. or whatever country, you now have a way to essentially just get around any of those rules. So this is pretty fun to watch. I think,
Another thing a lot of businesses are seeing, and especially Bitcoin businesses, are their bank accounts are just instantly being frozen for apparently no reason. They're not even saying that any crime was committed, just that something looks suspicious because some word in the company name has Liberty in it or has Bitcoin in it. And they can actually, the banks aren't really an arm of the government, so they can just freeze your account without even going to court. And the government themselves can now take your money under the Patriot Act. They can seize money if it has anything to do with a whole host of issues such as drugs, money laundering, what they call terrorism, but it could be as simple as just some suspicion that they make up. They don't have to actually prove anything in court. They can just seize your money. Good luck getting it back. So a lot of businesses are actually looking at this and saying, hey, maybe having money in the bank isn't such a safe thing. A lot of companies who are in Cyprus, I don't know how many of you have heard about what happened in Cyprus. Small businesses and large businesses had essentially a majority of their funds just taken away from them from their bank account in Cyprus by the government. They were even talking about taking money away from everyday individuals. In the end, they raised that to anything over about 100,000 euros, I think. So Bitcoin is starting to look very lucrative just as a way to store value without having it seized by banks or governments.
Yeah. Also, regarding free speech, so many people in the liberty movement are avid readers, and they have their favorite authors and their favorite websites and blogs where they learn about all this wonderful liberty stuff. Often you might buy books from the Mises Institute, or you might donate to some radical blog that you think is good. Well, whether it's the US or elsewhere, if you're a government and you want to find out who your enemies are, what are you going to do? You're going to go to exactly those websites. You're going to call up Visa and you're going to say, give me the names and addresses of all the people who have ever donated to this blog or bought these books from you. And it becomes a massive honeypot to figure out all the people who are opposed to your ideas, and opposed in the most radical and vocal ways.
And then you make those people pay extra taxes.
Yeah.
They actually don't have to call up Visa and MasterCard because the NSA has reported, or it has been shown that they have all of the records themselves. They just have to do a query on the database.
Yeah. So I bring this up because for any of you who sell things or ask for donations from liberty-minded people, if you do not offer them a way to pay anonymously, you are essentially making them a potential target.
Not even potential. I mean, we know for a fact that these transactions are being watched. When you visit these sites, that was logged. That is now stored in government servers. We know forever. We know that they coordinate between branches, that this information is going to go to the IRS, to DHS, to all the different branches of government that have any interest in the information.
And it doesn't have to be something that the government is doing now, right? Even we have this wonderful Obama administration that respects everyone's privacy and rights, right? What if, let's say in the future, the government isn't so careful and wants to target people? You think that they don't have the records from several years ago of the book that you bought, and you think that they're going to care that back then that would have been a violation of privacy? What you do online is there forever. And everyone needs to understand this. And most of the stuff that you do online doesn't matter when you're posting updates on Facebook, whatever. If you're buying things that could put you at risk legally, just under matters of free speech and for political dissent, you have to understand that you're doing yourself a terrible disservice if you're leaving an identity every time that you do that. So if you offer these things for people, accept Bitcoin so that you give them the option of doing it. And if you're buying things that are contentious, use Bitcoin so that the record does not exist anymore.
I just want to caution that Bitcoin isn't really 100% anonymous. So the same NSA that can go and look at your Visa card records, they do have public access to the Bitcoin blockchain. They can see all the transactions happening. What they don't know is who those addresses belong to. However, there is analysis they can do, especially if they do have records. If somebody bought the Bitcoins from an exchange, they might have the records from that exchange. There are ways of looking into this. So there are different services out there. There are projects that are being worked on.
More
but
directly, they don't have to trace the money if they trace your IP address.
Yeah.
So, and this is the sort of stuff that they've clearly said that they do, right?
Right.
So, Tor browsing and
yeah,
just using cryptography
there are all kinds of. You can't just use Bitcoin and expect that it's going to be 100% anonymous.
Yeah.
There are steps that you have to take.
It's important to understand that Bitcoin is not automatically perfectly anonymous. But what it does is it enables you to be anonymous if you wish to. But you still need to learn how to do that, and you have to take very good care on everything you do. But at least you're able to do that now. And if you want to learn about the various ways in which you can do that, feel free to stop by our booth, and we'll talk about these things. But honestly, they're not that hard. And everyone who considers themselves a liberty advocate should understand all the tools that are available to them, and this is one of the most powerful. Should we do questions?
Can we talk about regulation for a second?
Yeah.
So, someone asked me earlier today, what about PayPal? What is PayPal doing about Bitcoin? Are they fighting it? Are they thinking about joining you guys? It's an interesting question, particularly from a regulatory perspective, because one of the things that PayPal does is they block out countries, and they're legally required because of sanctions from the US government to, for instance, block payments to Belarus and Iran, right? These blocks, these laws that financial companies have to comply with are literally impossible to enforce with Bitcoin. So if PayPal all of a sudden decided that they were going to act as a Bitcoin wallet, they would have to find some way to get around the legal requirement that they have to enforce these sanctions. Because the users couldn't, I'm a user of the PayPal wallet, I want to send money to address XYZ. They don't know that address XYZ belongs to someone from Belarus. And they literally cannot enforce the sanction anymore. And this technology, this kind of anonymity that's layered into the technology, really makes a lot of regulations just silly. It's not so much that companies are going to have the choice whether or not they're going to enforce them on their customers. It's pretty much impossible.
Yeah. So let's start with some questions. And actually, are there any microphones in the audience? There's one here, okay.
Testing. All right. So, could you talk for the lesser geeks, non-geeks, about the exact steps you would go through personally in setting up your computer to anonymize your IP and to turn Bitcoin from pseudo-anonymous to real anonymous, and what your concerns would be during the setup process, what you'd be careful about specifically, your best practices?
So there are several different tools that you can use. The first tool that we already sort of talked about is called Tor. Basically, that Tor handles your internet connections, and in fact, just recently, I believe the most popular Bitcoin client got a patch that lets it work with Tor, and I'm sure some others do too. But then the second and more critical part is called a mixing service. Basically, what mixing services are is they're services where you put in a certain number of Bitcoins, and then you give them one of your other addresses that you've never used before, and then within a few hours or so, and in a few chunks, that's the service basically spits the same amount of Bitcoins back out again. So the reason why you'd want to use that is because, looking from an outside point of view, there's no obvious link between the Bitcoins that go in and the Bitcoins that go out. And now the most popular mixing service is run by blockchain.info, which charges a 0.5% fee. But really, you could use almost anything as a mixing service. You can use exchanges. You can use various kinds of online wallets. And basically, if you sort of chain many of them together, then really there's no single person in the world that will be able to figure out the trail between the Bitcoins that you received and where you're trying to spend them.
I'd like to add 2 more tools to that. I think that's a very good start, but anytime you're trying to do a transaction online, be it person to person or maybe at a business like Silk Road, you're going to have to use encryption. So you need PGP set up. PGP stands for pretty good privacy. And what this allows you to do is get a number called a public key from the person that you wish to communicate with. Say, send them your address or negotiate the terms of a transaction. You get their public key and you can encrypt the message so that only they can read it. So even if it's intercepted in the middle, no one else can understand. It's just gibberish. Last, even if you're using all these tools, but you're using them from a compromised system, it doesn't matter. And Windows is basically one big invitation for everybody to look at everything you do. It's full of spyware. It's basically impossible to use a Windows machine securely for long. So I highly encourage everyone here to look into Linux, and specifically Ubuntu is a very user-friendly system that comes with a lot of these tools, and you can easily install the rest.
I'd like to add one thing a little bit unrelated about Tor. A lot of you have probably heard about Tor. Usually you hear about it in relation to Bitcoin. But even if you do not use Bitcoin and you don't know what Bitcoin is and don't care about Bitcoin, you should know about Tor. Because when you go and you visit any website on the internet, your IP address is being tracked. And you can use Tor, which is very easy to use, to mask that IP. Tor is absolutely legal. It's actually funded by the United States Navy. And it allows you to mask IPs for any website that you visit. So you should all, that's your homework after PorcFest. When you get home, go download a Tor browser and play around with it for 10 minutes. Sure, install Linux, that's a little harder, but try out Tor because it's
There's an additional service called a VPN, and there are Bitcoin VPNs where you could actually pay for them with Bitcoin. And what they do is all your traffic goes through their server before it goes anywhere else. So the IP being logged is one of their servers, and they don't keep any logs tying you to any of these transactions. So it could be any of their customers. They don't really have a whole lot of information about their customers because everybody's paying with Bitcoin. So that's also a good either extra layer above Tor. It's usually a faster internet connection than Tor, so it's easier to use if you want to run everything through that and use Tor for specific things. But it's an extra tool that's good to know about.
Yeah, and never buy a VPN connection with a credit card.
It kind of defeats the purpose.
What's going to prevent so-called legitimate businesses from cooperating with the government maybe and sending out, like, we have the W-4 forms now. Say I'm an author, I want to only deal in Bitcoins. I want my money for my family, not for the government. But they send the government, they say, well, we sent her such and such amount of Bitcoins, and they have to fill out a government form. What's going to prevent businesses from having to fill out these forms?
Nothing prevents it, and a business that wishes to be fully legally compliant absolutely can do that with Bitcoin.
Yeah, and
the vast majority of businesses are going to want to follow every part of the law that they can. So just because they might integrate Bitcoin and utilize it doesn't mean that they're going to care about people's privacy or about tax issues. So basically, you just have to shop around. If you don't want to work with people who report your income, then that's up to you.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the other advantages of Bitcoin. Is that the thing with government regulation is that centralized services are generally very easy to regulate. Just in the field of digital currency. If you look at eGold, if you look at Liberty Reserve, if you look at PayPal, if you look at any of these other services that people have tried to put up in the past 10 to 15 years, they've either been subsumed into the system or they've been taken down. Bitcoin, on the other hand, keeps on living. So it's the same with businesses. And the thing is, as I mentioned earlier, that Bitcoin seriously reduces the cost of starting a business. Like you can, if you have just 45 minutes of your time, you can make a website, start selling a product, and accepting Bitcoins is really easy. You don't need a merchant account, and so it becomes much easier for people to set up small businesses, and because of that, people are no longer need to be as reliant on centralized institutions, and therefore more decentralized institutions are naturally far less vulnerable to the state.
Can you hear me?
Try again.
Okay, wow. Okay, two quick questions. The first one is, what makes you think that Tor is safe if it's coming from the U.S. government? No backdoor?
Yeah. Number one, practical answer. Silk Road has been around for 2 years, and so far, all of the people that have been all the Silk Road users that have been caught or arrested, we know that it has happened either because they were reselling the drugs in the real world in large quantities, or through the postal system.
I think more importantly is that you can see for yourself. It's open source technology, so go read it. If you don't think it's secure, then go look at it. You can see all the guts of it. Find what you think is vulnerability, bring it up. And,
it's also it's important to understand the motivation of why the U.S. government would fund something like Tor. Probably the main reason is the U.S. government does not want people that work for it to be revealed when they are working in foreign hostile countries. So they are funding it as a way for people who are trying to help the U.S. government in foreign countries mask that they are there. So whether this is a news correspondent in North Korea or someone trying to funnel weapons into Syria, the U.S. government needs a way for people anywhere to instantly hop on a computer and anonymize themselves. So there is a reason for the government to fund it, and obviously for them it's a double-edged sword.
Okay, and the second question that I had was, wasn't there a problem a couple of weeks ago with Bitcoin and the stability of the shares?
And the what?
The stability of the shares. Wasn't there like a crash of Bitcoin?
The shares? Which shares?
I think he means the price.
Oh, yeah, the price is crazy, man. The price will go all over the place. Bitcoin is honey badger, and it does what it wants. On the topic of the price, this catches a lot of people up because they're worried that if they buy a bunch of Bitcoins, the price will fall. And absolutely that can happen, and any money that you have in Bitcoin should not be money that you absolutely need because the price is volatile. But what's important is that volatility has been falling over time since Bitcoin was created. It is, every quarter it gets more stable than the one before. And it's just a natural market process of a brand new technology trying to find its appropriate price.
It's also gone up a lot more than it's gone down. Let's not forget this recent fall from 260 to 100 came immediately after the rise from 13 to 260 in 6 months.
Yeah.
So,
last year at PorcFest, Bitcoin was $6.
Yeah.
1 year ago.
Today it's about $110.
110.
Actually, this is very interesting. The value of all the Bitcoins moving around in the world in existence is roughly like $1.2 billion or something. This is larger than the value of something like 30 or 40 national currencies. So the people who are still thinking that Bitcoin is a joke because it's not a real, backed by a government currency, it's actually bigger than quite a few countries, and it's growing every day.
So piggyback on the anonymizing your Bitcoin stash. Could you also buy Litecoin and then turn around and buy Bitcoin right back again with new addresses? Would that clean it all completely? If you do it through a Tor?
That's basically a special case of using an exchange as a mixing service. Certainly you can do that.
And that would clean it right up?
Not necessarily, because the Litecoin transactions have the same sort of record. So whoever you did that exchange with, their records now become the key to whether or not that's anonymous.
But I think the idea is that the Bitcoin transaction to the Litecoin transaction are unlinkable. So in that regard, there's
except by the people involved, right?
Exactly.
If you want,
well, that's how any mixing service, except for some of the really recent ones, work. Like the really recent mixing services that aren't even out yet, they're just hypothetical mathematical constructions, can work without anyone knowing what's going on at all. Then that's something we're very excited about.
Zero
coin. There's zero coin. There's decentralized mixers, and there's something called secure computational integrity.
Also remember that you do not need to buy Bitcoin on an exchange. That's the most efficient. That's the easiest way to do it in large scale. But websites like localbitcoins.com help people link up with others in their area, and you can actually buy and sell Bitcoin with people. That's not logged in any exchange server, so that helps bring anonymity to it. But always remember that anonymity is never you can never achieve perfect anonymity. It's a gradient. It's like security. You can always get better and better, but don't ever assume that you're perfectly secure.
I wanted to add that some of the most talented mathematicians in the world at places like Johns Hopkins and MIT are now actually working on Bitcoin anonymity and how to make money laundering 100% efficient. They're just working on math problems, but that's the application they're finding, so they're excited about it.
They're doing what we're doing. We're just exploring this stuff for intellectual curiosity.
So I've gone over the technology probably tens of times. Each time I feel like I get a better grasp of it because there's a lot of moving parts. And the one thing that I'm still the most curious about is the so-called 51% attack. So I feel like I have a slight grasp. If you guys want to talk about that, that'd be great. But I understand the sort of counter argument is that it takes a hell of a lot of resources and a lot of coordination. Coordination, maybe the government's not so good at, but aren't they good at resources?
At the Bitcoin conference, this was actually a hot topic. A hacker named Dan Kaminsky had a lot of interesting things to say about it, and he was particularly concerned that a government might choose to do this, to attack the Bitcoin network. And while it does currently take a massive computing effort to reach this 51%, what's the network at now, like 60, 80 terahashes?
Let's cover what the 51% attack is. So you've heard about Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining is essentially the process of auditing and securing the transactions that are going on. If any single party ever gets more than 50%, so call it 51% of the mining power, they can do certain things to interfere with people's transactions. They can't do everything, but they can do enough to screw it up. So the fear is if one entity, be that the government or a malicious hacker with a lot of money, ever got enough mining power to reach that level, wouldn't Bitcoin start to become really problematic?
Yeah, so basically what they could do is they could fake or block transactions for the time that they control 51% of the network, 51% or more. At the moment, the network, let's just say 80 terahashes.
That's about 120.
120? Jesus, yeah. Wow.
So the speed of the current Bitcoin mining network is 120 terahashes, and I don't know what the hell that means, but I do know that the brand new supercomputer that the NSA built down in Utah is something like 6 terahashes, and it's like a $50 billion complex, and that's the top thing that the government has right now, 6 terahashes, and the Bitcoin network achieved 120 terahashes just on the open market.
There's no way it gets up to 6.
The relevant statistic is, I believe, that the Bitcoin network is as strong at its particular task as all the top 500 supercomputers in the world combined, multiplied by 8.
Yeah. Wow. But there are some problems. So particularly, we got all this computing power put together, right? Presumably, if somebody cared enough, they could duplicate that effort. For instance, most of the computing power in the Bitcoin network right now is done by very, very specialized machines manufactured in China. The factories that pump out these chips and these ASIC miners can easily just ramp up production and start selling to, say, the Chinese government, right? And the Chinese government easily has enough money to outspend the current Bitcoin community if they chose to do this. Now, why would they do this? And would it actually work? It might work against the current blockchain, against Bitcoin 1.0, but would it actually stop cryptocurrency? Would it actually stop System D? I think the answer to that is clearly no. If they made a million ASIC miners and spent, I don't know how much it would cost, hundreds of millions of dollars, trying to do this attack against Bitcoin specifically, we'd all switch the algorithm minorly, make all of their investment useless, switch over to Bitcoin 1.01, and the attack would fail. They'd have to start all over again. Yeah, we can do this as many times as necessary.
It comes down to can the government move faster than the free market? And this is the experiment, and we'll see what happens.
This feels very tortoise and the hairy, but...
I've spent the past few years in Austin, Texas, talking to local businesses about accepting silver and barter as a medium of exchange. We've managed to find a few dozen businesses that are willing to do so. I was wondering if y'all could give any advice on talking points I could utilize in order to demystify Bitcoin to encourage local businesses in Central Texas to accept Bitcoin as a medium of exchange.
So this is probably where we are sort of the more tamer version of Bitcoin advocacy comes in. Bitcoin has very low fees, 0 to 1%, depending on what services you use. It's potentially easier to use. From personal experience, not quite yet, but it's getting there, especially if you have a good. Yeah, easier than silver. So if you're fine with silver, you're fine with Bitcoin. But it's potentially getting there, especially if you have a good internet connection. If you're an online business with Bitcoin, you automatically accept customers from 194 countries around the world. The only exception being North Korea, so that because they have no internet. So yeah, so that's those are basically the main. Oh, and there's also no chargebacks, which means that like customers can't reverse transactions after they make them, and for internet businesses in some industries, it's also very important.
Yeah, I think for the average business, you're trying to get a bar down the street or a food shop, you like their burger to take Bitcoin. It's important to think of Bitcoin as two different things. One is the currency that we all know and love, and then two is the payment system, which for your average coffee shop or your average business, it's just for them it's just a transaction. So you basically say, listen, I want to pay you with Bitcoin. Don't worry about what a Bitcoin is, but the cost is much lower, and there's all these companies. There's Coinapult, there's BitPay, there's a lot of other payment processors, so that they don't even see a Bitcoin. All they see is dollars in their bank account, just like a debit card transaction.
Yeah.
So if you could basically ignore the currency, focus on the payment system, I think for mainstream adoption, that's really the way to go.
Right on.
And also, to be honest, the average brick and mortar store is not necessarily going to care about Bitcoin just yet. The people who are probably accepting gold and silver as payment probably have an ideological reason to, because in terms of pure money efficiency, it's not always super convenient. Bitcoin will be roughly the same. So any company that has that sort of ideological reason for accepting alternative currencies should be very interested in Bitcoin. But if they don't have that ideological bent, I wouldn't say it's good to spend time on them. Bitcoin will find the places where it makes the most sense on its own.
I just want to add a couple other points. The first one is that Bitcoin is really hot in the press right now. So I constantly, personally, have reporters ask me all the time, hey, send me to some places that are taking Bitcoin. They really want to see actual brick and mortar interesting places that are taking Bitcoin. So it's a chance for places that start accepting Bitcoin to actually get in the national press, the local press. That's a big talking point. And the other thing is they could potentially get their money faster. If they're using Visa and MasterCard, sometimes it takes a few days for them to even get their funds. If they're taking Bitcoin, they'll get it instantly. If they're using something like BitPay, they might get it within a day. So that could be another advantage for them.
All right, so we're out of time. We'll do one question real quickly.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm 72 years old, and so forgive me if my memory's a bit faulty, but I thought I saw a few days ago a notice about some Bitcoin assets being seized by the Fed. Is that reporting true? And if so, what does it mean about the ability of the Fed to influence what you're doing?
Bitcoins themselves cannot be seized unless you reveal certain secret information to them. What you may be referring to is a bank account which got seized that was owned by a Bitcoin company. And you don't need to convince us that bank accounts are crappy. So bank accounts will always be vulnerable. Anyone who cares about not having wealth confiscated, the only way to do that is with privately held bullion or with Bitcoin. All right, thank you guys.
Come on, you young people, it's time to rejoice and claim your inheritance, raise up your voice. The lantern of liberty's leading the way in a year for the youth. This is New Year.